Story 1. The 7 caskets. 7 kids have gone missing in my town over the last 3 decades. I was a part of the search party for the 7th. This is our story. The child's parents had left him in the care of a neighbor while they ran to the gas station. The neighbor, an elderly woman named Margaret, could not keep up with the boy while they played, so she eventually sat down to rest. The boy, not at all tired, wanted to keep playing, but the old woman was exhausted and told him to wait until his parents returned. He asked if he could play with her husband, who lay in bed upstairs, but she said no, explaining to him that her husband was very tired due to his age, much like she had become. As any 7-year-old would, the boy found this answer unacceptable and fled to the backyard, hoping to find something or someone to play with. He didn't return. Margaret had fallen asleep in her living room. She was stirred awake by the sound of the doorbell and shambled over to the front door. Awaiting her there were the boy's parents, whom she greeted before suddenly remembering that she had been charged with looking after their son. The sudden realization, which dawned plainly on the old woman's face, brought immediate worry to the faces of the parents, and the trio began to call out for the boy. Their shouts fell on deaf ears, though. The boy was long gone. I was one of the volunteer searchers, and the particular group I accompanied was tasked with searching the nearby woods. By the time people had gathered and the police had arrived, it was nearly nightfall, so some of us had to push through the trees and thick vegetation blindly. A surprising number of people did not bring flashlights. I was one of them. However, I did bring my father's emergency flare gun, which he thankfully had never had to use during his boating days. Normally, bringing a flare gun into the woods is inadvisable, considering I'd be surrounded by flammable vegetation. But I figured it would be useful if my group discovered the boy, hopefully alive. I stumbled over roots, pushed through brambles that tore my shirt and cut my skin, and trampled flowers that were unidentifiable in the gloom. The moonlight shone dimly through the trees, whose dense foliage formed a natural ceiling over the woods. Eventually, as expected, I became separated from my search group, lost amidst the unrecognizable flora. Panic crept into my mind, but I figured that with dozens of other people out, searching for the boy, I was bound to come across someone soon. Pushing past the panic was the hope that maybe the boy had stumbled through these parts of the woods as well, and that I would be the one to find him. Then, as if to assuage my fears and affirm my hopes, I saw a figure a few meters ahead, leaning against a tree. My heartbeat quickened when I saw that he was not all that tall, about the size of a boy. I jogged toward him, but when I grew close enough to see his face, he ran off. I chased after him, calling out the boy's name. Adam. It started to rain. I sloshed through the mud, which had been easily traversable ground only minutes ago. My progress now hampered considerably. I could still see the boy ahead, but he drew smaller and fainter. Even though I tried to power through, I felt myself succumbing to the thickening mud. It became like quicksand, restricting my entire body, resisting my most strenuous exertions. It was too late when I remembered that struggling would probably only quicken my sinking. Seconds later, the mud was up to my chin. I had apparently stumbled upon some deep, hidden depression in the earth. Forgetting the flare gun in my pocket, I tried calling out, but the rain fell heavily, drowning out my screams as I drowned in that sinkhole. Darkness rushed in, and all became black. I emerged elsewhere. The earth vomited me forth with a wet squelch, as if expelling something indigestible. The rain was gone here, and the environment was illuminated by several distinct rays of moonlight, as if this place were washed over by a trio of moons. The trees were different too. They towered incredibly high, their tops piercing the gray cloudage above, as if rising to greet the triple lunar vanguard. Grass rose as tall as men in some places, while other areas were completely barren, some sunken in, others raised in mounds of dirt. I progressed forward from where I had landed, hoping that if the boy had come here, I would find him, and if not him, a way to escape. The hole from which I had arisen had already smoothed over, leaving no signs of being penetrable. Eventually, I came across something resembling a path. At the start of this path, to my horror, was a massive coffin that towered nearly as tall as the great trees I had seen earlier. The coffin's lid was open, and it gave off a strange, sinister impression. It seemed hungrily anticipatory, as if it awaited a soon-to-arrive occupant. I gave it a wide berth as I passed, and thankfully, nothing sprung out of it to attack or draw me in. Further on, I came across other caskets, all of which seemed as though they were built for giants. Trees, not quite as tall as the others but still massive in their own right, had grown directly through the caskets, throwing the lids off but obscuring any signs of the occupants if there were any. Great boughs pierced through the frames of the caskets, giving the trees the appearance of wearing polished wooden armor. As I progressed down the coffin-flanked path, the funerary housings became more degraded, noticeably withered by time. The trees that grew through them became significantly more prominent, until, at the final tree, the only observable presence of the caskets were splinters sticking out from the trunk, with what seemed like grim defiance. This tree was as tall as the others I had initially seen. Something about it, perhaps its age and its utter disregard for the casket through which it had grown, saddened me deeply. There was also a vague, unplaceable familiarity about the casket shards, as if I had somehow seen them or inexplicably knew of their occupants before coming here. The path lined with these casket-infused trees ended. 7 trees in total, and opened up into a massive, swampy area. In the center of the mire was a large pool, over which hovered a soft, white mist. Despite the locale, I could hear no bugs or bog-inhabiting creatures, and the water's surface was at a complete rest. I approached the pool, drawn to it by some unreal force and my own fixation on its mesmeric surface. Without consciously intending to do so, I walked right into the pool. It was only when the water shifted that I noticed the change. The water, which had been placid and translucent green, suddenly turned dark and violent, churning viciously and rocking my body helplessly to and fro. The white mist changed to a dismal red, suddenly feeling like a great encumbrance on my body as I tried to hold my footing in the sloshing waves. Rain started to fall, making the pool's level rise until it was up to my chest. The coffins behind me, engorged by the mammoth trees, seemed to groan in agony as their internal burdens expanded to nightmarish proportions, splintering the wood of which they were made. Beneath me, I began to hear a voice calling from the depths of the pool. Peering into the dark water, I saw what looked like a boy. My instinctual desire to extricate myself from the pool was instantly overridden by my desire to save the child, so I plunged downward into the murk. I reached him. Surprisingly, I grabbed the boy, who, to my short-lived joy, resembled Adam. I had found him somehow trapped in this abysmal place. I held him close to me with one arm and used the other to propel myself upward, all the while fighting the monstrous currents that battered me underwater just as much as they did above it. When the realization hit me that I wouldn't reach the surface before my lungs burst, I found myself crying, not for my own life, but for the boy whom I couldn't save. Somehow, the tears felt warm against my cold skin, as if they clung to my face instead of getting mixed into the stagnant waters around me. In a last moment of consciousness, I withdrew the flare gun from my pocket and extended my arm as far upward as it would go, kicking my legs to hopefully stay close enough to the surface for the gun to fire properly. I wasn't sure if it was going to work, honestly, but it was all that I had. Thankfully, my finger pulled the trigger seconds before consciousness fully left me, and we sank downward into the abyssal depths. I awoke in a hospital bed with a nurse attending to me. She smiled and said she'd go get the doctor. When they returned, they were accompanied by another woman. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her, either due to the drugs assuredly being pumped into my system or my own weariness from the half-remembered ordeal. Together, the doctor and the woman informed me of what had happened. My absence from the search party had pretty much gone unnoticed until they had given up for the night, and a roll call was conducted to make sure everyone had gotten back safely. When I hadn't made myself present, the people resumed their search, this time for me, which the woman admitted to being happy about because she was Adam's mother and hadn't wanted to give up looking for him. Rather than splitting up again and risking more people getting lost, They surged through the trees together, collectively sweeping through the darkened woods. At some point, perhaps an hour into the search, a flare shot exploded into the rainy sky. Due to the heavy downpour and the thick, visually obstructing treetops, they could only partially trace the path of the flare. They searched the general area from which they suspected it had been fired, but initially found nothing. Tired and drenched, talk of returning home started up, and some had already started to make their way back to the neighborhood. Before the last of the searchers left, the woman, Adam's mother, heard crying. She approached the sound and found me lying on the ground, wailing, with her son held tightly in my arms and the flare gun lying at my side. Around us, washed up from a shallow grave by the torrential rain, were the other children. Adam was the only one alive among them. I had been incoherent, totally unresponsive, and crying dumbly. Adam was unconscious but not seriously harmed. We were both taken to the hospital, and I was placated into quietness along the way. When Adam awoke, he told the authorities that the old man Margaret's husband had taken him, hurt him, and left him among the others in a shallow pit. The old man had first uncovered the pit to place Adam inside, and then resealed it. The heavy rain had washed away the recently piled soil, which had not had time to harden and become overgrown as had happened with the others over the years. The old man was arrested, and after a few hours of questioning, he admitted to being responsible for the 7 missing children over the last 30 years. Adam fully recuperated and wanted to thank me. He was brought in and rushed to my bedside. He hugged me, thanking me relentlessly, and his mother did as well. The doctor informed me that I'd be fine and could return home in the evening. They all left, letting me rest. I was happy to see Adam alive and well, but something troubled me deeply. I realized that while he was indeed the boy I had rescued from the water, he definitely was not the boy who had led me to the place where I fell into the sinkhole. Later, once I returned home, I looked up pictures of the missing children in our town. After scrolling through the old files, I finally came across a photograph of the very first child, who had gone missing back in the late 80s. Even though I hadn't gotten a perfectly clear look at the child who had led me to that sinkhole, I knew without a doubt that this was him. I also knew somehow that the last casket I had come across in that extra-mundane realm, the one completely obliterated by the roots of the tree, had been his. Story 2. The Outward Bound Cover-Up. Part 1. The Solo Camp. I'd like to preface this by saying I know a lot of people might think this is fake and that this statement is just me trying to trick you. But this really happened and I really don't know where else to go on this computer. I'll explain later. All the normal sites are blocked. Facebook, email, etc. So I tried every single site imaginable, which eventually led me here. I think this is a good place for it, and I'm not in any immediate danger, so I think it's okay to write the story out in its entirety. First, let's do introductions. My name is Ty. It's not short for anything, not Tyler or Tyrone. Just Ty. Nice to meet you. I live in the southeast of Pennsylvania, near Philadelphia, but closer to Bucks County. Living in a more rural area, I've always been fascinated with the woods and nature in general. One thing I've been really interested in is survival. Like living on your own with no commodities or luxuries of modern life, just fending for yourself. Reading up online about this, I found a program called Outward Bound. I don't know if it operates in other areas, but the Outward Bound groups in my area go out into the wilderness as a group of about 5 boys. They camp together and learn survival skills for about 5 days, and then all the boys go out on what is called a solo, where we camp completely alone, about a mile apart from each other, for 3 days. Obviously, since it's the 21st century, we are given walkie-talkies and a map of where the other campers are in case there's an emergency. Even if those fail, we are basically within screaming distance of one another, and the camp leader makes regular rounds around the perimeter of our campsites. It's supposed to be fail-safe with no liabilities, but something happened. Let me first give you a rundown of our group. There was me, my friend Caleb, his friend Marco, and 2 brothers named Brian and David, whom I didn't know very well. Our leader Nick was also with us. Nick was relatively new. This was only his 2nd expedition. The first 5 days went without a single problem. It was just normal camping. On the last night before our solos began, we were working together as a group. That's when it started. We were all in our makeshift tents, with Nick in his larger and more advanced canopy tent farther away, when we heard a rustling in the leaves. Big deal, right? That's what we thought too. Brian woke up first. He was the most skittish of the group. I assumed he only went on the trip because his brother was going. He woke up his brother, and their whispering woke the rest of us up. Brian then told us what was going on. Obviously, we laughed at him, thinking he was just messing around or being a scaredy cat. But then we heard it. The majority of us, being well accustomed to the woods and its noises, brushed it off. Even after what I've witnessed, I still think it was probably just a rabbit. I guess we all had trouble going back to sleep after that. So partly to pass the time and partly to scare Brian, we told horror stories. I don't remember the specifics. I guess I'm just too rattled. But I remember the outline of one that Marco told, mostly because of how it affected what happened later. It was about a boy who went to wander the forest one day. While walking, he heard a scream coming from the far end of the woods. Coming closer to the sound, he saw nothing. He finally went to the exact spot the noise seemed to be coming from, but still found nothing. Turning back, confused and a little creeped out, he saw a wolf walking up the path. The wolf, I don't know why it would, but a teenager made up this story, so whatever, suddenly bit him, and the boy started screaming. The boy then transformed into a wolf, just like that one, doomed to fall into its clutches for the rest of his days. A very bad story, if you ask me. After he finished telling it, Marco suddenly screamed to try to scare Brian. But at that point, we were all just annoyed. After those first 5 days, I was really excited because my favorite part of the trip was finally here. The solo, we all went out alone, ready to face the woods. The campsites were aligned in a straight row from east to west, with each camp being a mile apart, and Nick being in the center. From east to west, the alignment went me, Marco, Brian, Nick, Caleb, and David. The first day was one of the best days of my life, despite what happened that night and morning. I caught a rabbit, cooked it, and ate it. I went fishing, climbed a tree, and bathed and drank from a river. I was a real woodsman. Then, it all went to shit. I don't know when the killing started, or if anybody else had even been killed yet, but for me it started that night around 100 in the morning, if I was reading the moon right. I went out to take a piss in the stream when I saw a wounded rabbit on the ground. I thought I could save myself the trouble of hunting for my next meal. So I drew my knife and walked ever so slowly over to it, knife in hand. I crept over the rabbit until I could hear its breathing. I plunged my knife down, but suddenly felt a sharp pain in my lower leg. The rabbit, as injured as it looked, somehow dodged and managed to slash me before getting away. Luckily for me, I didn't stab myself directly in the leg, it had just cut me on the side. There wasn't too much blood, but it was hard to walk. I semi-crawled back to the campsite and radioed Nick. No response. Shit. I had disinfectant with me. I'm not an animal, and since the cut was shallow, I knew I wouldn't die or anything. It didn't look like it needed stitches either, so I decided to just wait until morning. I assumed Nick was probably just asleep. I didn't bother radioing the other guys because they couldn't help me. I decided to go back to sleep, so I turned my walkie-talkie off, another dumbass horror movie move on my part. As I was trying to drift off to sleep, I was suddenly awakened by a blood-curdling scream. I instantly recognized it. It was Marco. Guys, I know you'll be angry and annoyed when I tell you what I did when I heard that scream. I did nothing, but let me explain. Maybe it was my sleepiness or my injury, but I did not think it was a real scream. I thought that since Marco's tent was right near Brian's, he was just trying to scare Brian again. It was a shitty move on my part. I know, but I couldn't have helped him anyway. I was in no condition to run a mile to go get him. I didn't know if it was Brian who was screaming either, because Brian was either terrified or already dead. I really don't know at this point. About an hour later, I was still awake. I had tried to play it off before, but the pain in my leg was becoming unbearable. The wound was throbbing, and I just couldn't deal with it anymore. It was hell. I knew I wasn't going to die, but I couldn't stand the pain. Again, maybe it was the sleep deprivation or the agony, but I decided to go to Nick's camp. I knew he kept heavy painkillers in his medical kit for emergencies. Earlier, I had gathered some large sticks to make a fire, which I never ended up lighting, so I grabbed the biggest one and used it as a makeshift crutch. I specifically went around Marco and Brian's campsites because I didn't want to wake them, and I had a pretty good idea of where I was going. I heard the average noises of the woods, leaves crunching, wind blowing, but nothing scared me. I just wanted those painkillers. I kind of tuned out in the middle of my walk. It's mostly a blur now. I remember it was long and I remember it was extremely painful, but I especially remember getting to Nick's cabin tent, and I remember his body. The funny thing is, I saw the painkillers first. I think I was dimly aware that there was a dead silence in the tent, which was weird because Nick normally snored like a bear. But in my delirium, I didn't notice or care. I gulped down the pills, and even though they didn't take effect right away, I felt better. Then, the steady, heavy silence of the tent truly washed over me. Before I even looked at him, I knew he was dead. His body. It wasn't something any animal could do. I don't think it's something any human could do either, not without heavy machinery. In fact, it wasn't really even a full body anymore. He was torn to absolute shreds. There was a massive pool of blood and a pile of mushed meat. If you've ever made meatloaf, he looked like the raw meatloaf mix, milk, eggs, and raw meat mashed together by hand. He looked like human jello. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel panicked. I just stared at his body for a few minutes. Then reality hit me. I needed to get the fuck out of there. I wasn't close to Nick. There was no time for mourning. I wasn't really close to any of these people. The closest thing I had to a friend was Caleb, and we had only met during the training program. I'm a survivalist, so that's what I did. I survived. Call me an asshole, but I needed to escape. Thinking quickly, I grabbed Nick's radio and flicked it on. On the channel, I heard David's voice screaming. I immediately flicked it to a different channel while scanning the woods. The radio static cracked, and a voice said, "It hit Marco, and now it's on to David. It's moving west." I immediately flicked the radio to the emergency frequency, blurted out where I was, and started moving east as fast as my leg could carry me. That's all I remember. Like my trip to Nick's tent, the escape is a blur. Everything is. First I was heading east, then I was in a police cruiser, and then I was telling them exactly what happened. I didn't hold anything back, but I should have. They told me they would contact my parents and that I should wait in the sheriff's office where I'm sitting right now, writing this down. A few minutes before I started typing, about 6 men in suits came in here asking for me. I overheard them talking to the sheriff about me. They're trying to take me. They said this matter is a matter of national security. I don't know if I'm getting out of here or not. The painkillers are wearing off, and man, it'd be nice to have one right now. I guess that's the end. Do what you want with this story. Brush it off as a nice little horror story, and go about your life if you want. But I am real. I hope at least I'm remembered. I guess now is goodbye. Sorry I don't have all the answers. Part 2. The Aftermath and the Cover-Up High. For those of you who read my last post, this is a partial explanation of what I've found so far. I'm back home now, but I still don't have all the answers. As some of you on the forums suggested, I just played stupid for a lot of the questions they asked me. I revised my story. I didn't mention anything that didn't think was human. I just said I heard screaming and thought I saw a body. They asked me if I smelled anything weird, and I said no. I just thought it was odd that they asked me that, so I wanted to include it here. The men in suits who were at the station are either running this from behind the scenes or were sent away, because I haven't seen them since. The police wouldn't tell me anything, but I've managed to piece some information together. From what I know so far, there is some kind of monster, alien, or high-priority serial killer that attacked our campsite. I know it's high priority because of the men in suits. I saw them flash their FBI badges. I assume it's not a normal serial killer because I don't know how a human could have mashed up Nick's body like that without some kind of heavy machinery, which I definitely would have heard. I don't think a normal animal could have done that either. so it must have been something supernatural. I don't really believe in that stuff, but I think something anomalous had to have done this. I never actually saw the thing, but a part of me kind of wants to now. I assume it is very good at keeping quiet, because I heard no noises that weren't human. They kept me in that office for a good 2 hours. Luckily, I deleted the browser history on the office computer after I wrote my first post, because they came in there, unplugged it, and asked me, "Did you go on this?" I obviously said no. I asked one of them if there was a police report I could read, and she dismissed me immediately. The police called my parents, and before they took me home, they had a long talk with them that I wasn't allowed to overhear. When we got home, my parents told me that we couldn't talk about it to anybody, and that we had to try and forget the whole thing. I asked if I could see any of the other boys from my group, and they said, "No, I'm not allowed to. I don't really know what's happening." Whenever I ask my parents about anything, they just say, "I know it's hard, Ty, but we're not talking about this." After that, they won't even respond if I ask further. I feel like the whole world has gone crazy. I checked all the news sites for our area and came up with absolutely nothing. Nobody seems to know about it. I was contemplating contacting the local news, but I thought it might just make things worse for me, and obviously, I'm not allowed to tell anybody. For now, I guess I'll just try to go about my normal life, but it's gonna be hard. I was thinking about going back into the woods to investigate, and I even drove up to the edge, but there was yellow police tape surrounding the entire perimeter of the area. I didn't cross it, but I'm wondering now if I should have ducked under and checked out the site. I don't expect they'll keep the police tape up for long, as that would cause too much local suspicion. My leg is doing better. I'm going to the doctor tomorrow. My mom told me that if the doctor asks what caused the wound, I should say I was working in the garden and accidentally cut myself. I tried to call the Outward Bound headquarters, but they told me they had no record of my camp group or of anyone named Nick in their database. I don't really know what to do now. I essentially have no proof of what happened besides my own word. I can't even find any of my application papers to join Outward Bound. I don't even have any of the other boys' phone numbers or nicks. Hell, I don't even know any of their last names. I really don't think I could prove these events happened, no matter how much digging I do. I feel incredibly guilty that I left them all behind, but with my injury I might have just gotten killed too, and one death is better than two, I guess. Honestly, I don't even know if any of them are actually dead. This is all very confusing. I don't know whether I should just keep my head down and forget about it, or if I should try to expose this cover-up. I think the people have a right to know what's happening, and I think I especially have a right to know since I was directly involved. What scares me the most is whatever is still going on in that forest. If it is some kind of monster, though I'm still a little skeptical, how are they going to capture it? Am I safe with my house being right on the edge of the woods? Does it somehow have my scent? Even though I hate that someone is trying to cover this up, I really hope they succeed in catching whatever did this. Do you guys think I should go back into the woods? I think any kind of physical evidence would have been cleaned up and taken away by now, and I don't want to risk getting caught and putting myself in actual danger. I'm really glad this site exists so I could at least share my story. I really didn't expect anybody to believe me, because why would you? I hope this is the last story I have to tell, but I'll come back if there's more, I promise. I know one thing for sure though, I definitely don't want to be a survivalist anymore. Story 3. I'm going to tell you the story of how one of my friends and I went camping and came face to face with what I can only describe as a monster. I'm an outdoorsy type of guy. I love hiking, hunting, bird watching, rock climbing, river swimming, and having sex under the stars in the back of my Jeep, all that stuff. I camped often, and I was very familiar with the forests of Oregon. I knew what animals could hurt me, how to deter them, and which plants wouldn't put me in a hospital if I ate them. So, when I planned a routine camping trip with 3 of my buddies, mostly to get my girlfriend breaking up with me out of my mind, I was expecting it to be fun. Some beer, hunting, a little more beer laughing, and even more beer. You know, that expectation was entirely wrong. It all started the first night we were out there. Chris had taken us on some really extreme hiking trails, as he described them, trails that the three of us had never been on. None of us were really scared. We were all mid-20s guys in great shape, so we figured if Chris knew the way, we'd be fine. And we were. We set up camp after falling just a bit short of the 10-mile goal we had started out with in the morning. We were happy to finally sit down and lighten our load a bit by having a few beers. Fast forward a few hours and more than a few beers later, we were shouting and carrying on as the campfire licked the darkness away from our circle. Any animal noises we heard were easily shrugged off. No animal in its right mind would dare come near a loud commotion like this. But suddenly, we heard something that wasn't an animal noise. We all paused. Jared raised his hand and turned his head, ear pointing towards the sound. It was the unmistakable sound of tires rolling over fallen leaves and branches, conjoined with the low hum of a running engine. We all reached for our weapons. We each had a hunting rifle, which suddenly ended up in our laps. You might think this was a bit extreme, but you never know what crazy, wrong-turn lunatics you're going to run into in the woods past midnight. Besides, the sound of the tires was close, and it was coming straight toward us. The most off-putting thing, though, was that beyond the glow of our fire, there was only the inky blackness of the night, no headlights. We were all dead silent. The noise stopped just beyond the tree line of the small clearing we were in. Then a car door opened, the jingling of keys. The car door closed. Then came footsteps, the clear, heavy crunching of foliage and fallen branches. I had enough. I raised my rifle toward the sound. They had to be just barely out of our sight, which meant we were very clearly in theirs. "What do you want?" I asked, clearly and sternly, my rifle still pointing in the general direction of the noise. Two palms were the first thing I saw emerging from the darkness, followed by the form of a frail-looking old man walking out from the shadows below them. He had his hands raised in the air, as if I were a cop about to arrest him. I'd wave a white flag, but the only thing white I've got is my drawers, he said, offering a warm smile that was broken up by the fact that he was missing about half of his teeth. I lowered my rifle. He slowly made his way into the ring of twilight that our fire created against the backdrop of the near full moon sky. He was a caricature of a man. A gray beard hung off his chin, bushing out widely before dropping off his face, the kind of beard where you'd think you'd accidentally eat more of it than you managed to trim. He wore a red and black plaid shirt, dirty, faded jeans, big black oversized rubber boots, and a decrepit-looking Cabela's hat trying to contain the thin, frail hair that stuck out from under it, shooting off in every direction. There he stood, a big goofy grin plastered on his face. "Mind if I join you fellows for a spell?" He spoke in a thick southern accent I couldn't quite place. "Why are you out here in the woods with no headlights on and—" Chris trailed off as he looked at his watch. At almost 2 a.m., he finished. The mysterious hillbilly stranger took a seat on one of the heavy pieces of firewood that Duncan had hauled over. "I'm out here because of what's out here, son," he said. My grip tightened on my rifle again, and I didn't budge. "What the fuck does that mean?" Duncan chimed in, using his usual tough guy bravado as he leaned forward in his camping chair. "I'm here because you fellows don't know these trees too good. I'm here to tell you that you've wandered right into the big guy's territory," the old man said, gesturing broadly with his hands. "So, you're the big guy then, I take it?" I said, almost laughing. No, sir, I ain't no monster, but this thing is," he said vaguely. "There's a monster in the woods?" I asked blatantly and bluntly, trying to make it clear with my tone that I knew he was full of shit, but then Jared had to get him going. "What's it look like?" Jared asked. None of my skepticism present in his voice. Teeth about as big as your forearm, I'd say. Got dark leathery skin. The natives call it the tree shaker. It's as big as a house. "Ah, not as big as my house," Duncan interrupted. "Listen, buddy, I don't believe you. And even if I did, there isn't anything in these woods that Sheila and I can't handle," he said, patting the rifle in his lap. He had named his gun. Of course he did. "Listen, son, I don't give a damn if you believe me or not. I'm just being a good citizen out here in the United States and telling you that being out here is dangerous. The old man's voice grew grimmer as he spoke. "This ain't like other animals you've ever seen spooked. He likes hooting and hollering, just like you fellows are doing. Fire and light don't scare him neither. And as far as that pea shooter goes, you'd better bring some military-grade firepower if you want to hurt him," he warned gravely. I still wasn't buying it. "Listen, buddy, you've got nothing to worry about. We're going to shack up, get some sleep, and we'll be on the move shortly after sunrise," I told him. "Now get out of here, you old windbag." Duncan finished for me. The old man stood up from his wooden perch and let out an exasperated sigh. "All right, boys, all right. Just don't bother running if he sees you." He shook his head as he turned away and began to walk back to his vehicle. "Damn thing ran my old Jeep down," he muttered as he walked. "It was a nice fucking Jeep too, real good Jeep." His voice disappeared into the dark woods. Soon we heard his tires roll away slowly, and once more we were alone. "Well, that killed the mood," Chris said flatly. The sun rose on an uneventful morning. We all greeted the daylight with the usual grogginess that 7 or 8 beers tend to bring. There were some murmurs about the crazy old man from last night, myself included. It was a pretty weird interaction. We didn't dwell on it too long, though, and started moving again. We planned to continue hiking for another 5 kilometers to get to a ridge that Chris kept talking about, supposedly featuring an amazing view. Every time an animal crossed our path, a joke would pop up about the old guy from the night before. "Look out, it's the monster. Hey, it's the old dude's wife." Stuff like that. The one that got the biggest laugh was when Duncan jumped back in fright, when a bird flew out of a tree right over our heads. "Look out, it's the tree shaker," he announced in an exaggerated Ace Ventura style. At the very least, the late-night interaction had given us something to joke about. We continued hiking all morning until we stopped for lunch. About 2 bites into my chicken sandwich, I stopped chewing. I thought I heard something. I waited. There it was again. It was weird. I didn't hear the original sound, just the lingering echo of it. I shushed everyone and told them to listen. Once again, an echo resonated through the forest. "What's that? You're the bird guy?" Jared asked me, referring to my bird-watching background. He was right to ask, but it sounded like a bird, only much bigger, and definitely not normal. There was a raw ferocity behind it, akin to a lion's roar. "Whatever it is, it's far off," I replied. "After all, we could barely hear it. It's probably just a wounded animal. They make all kinds of crazy sounds when they're dying," Duncan responded. It seemed to make sense, and Duncan was even more of an experienced outdoorsman than me, so we decided he was right. A few more minutes of eating, and we were back on the trail. It was uneventful for a while. Chris kept saying, "We're almost there, just another few hours," and he was right on with his directions. We finally came to the crest of the legendary ridge. It was a sight to behold. The land dipped down into a shadow-filled valley and then rose up again into a dwarf mountain. Trees and plants bloomed right into the horizon, and a rushing river ran through the valley. We figured it was a great place to set up camp. While we were laying out our sleeping bags, Jared suddenly called everyone over to look over the edge of the ridge again. Down below, clear as day, 3 or 4 massive trees all in a bunch shook violently. "I hate to say it, but those trees are definitely shaking," Jared said, a tremor of fear in his voice. We were quiet for a little while, watching them. "Probably a bear orgy," Duncan joked. "Yeah, definitely a bear orgy," Chris agreed. They both joked and agreed with each other so quickly I wasn't even sure who had said what. Their confidence and levity seemed to win over Jared, and his brief moment of fright passed. Everyone got back to setting up camp. I kept an eye on the trees, though. They were still shaking, but the shaking wasn't stationary. The movement was progressing through the forest, like something massive was just walking through, shaking the trees as it passed. I never mentioned that detail to the others. I just forced myself to put it out of my mind. It was another night of beer and good times. We were loud and rambunctious again. God, what a time. We finally shut down and went to sleep around 3 o'clock in the morning. I went to bed happy. I woke up terrified. Once again, I heard that weird call in the distance. I sat up. The smoldering embers of the campfire illuminated the camp, just enough to let me know that none of the others had heard it. Maybe I was just hearing things. I laid back down, but I couldn't sleep. I was sure I had heard it. Then I heard the footsteps. They were off in the distance, far away but closing in. Don't bother running if he sees you. The old man's words rang like a siren in my head, so I stayed exactly where I was. I didn't wake anyone up. I didn't make a single sound. The footsteps were getting closer, walking directly towards our camp. It sounded incredibly heavy, like it was made out of solid cast iron. The heavy thuds grew so loud I couldn't believe no one else was waking up. Eventually, the footsteps slowed down. It was now literally right next to us, just outside our tents. I held my breath. I had chosen the worst sleeping position. The crown of my head was pointing directly towards the edge of the tent nearest to the sound. As I laid there, I was totally and utterly helpless. I couldn't even see the thing that was about to eviscerate me just beyond the tree line. It started taking slow, calculated steps. It crushed massive fallen branches as it walked, sounding like an elephant stepping onto a field of chicken bones. Suddenly, Duncan stirred and looked over in my direction. "What the fuck? Holy fuck!" he screamed, trying to scramble to his feet. The beast lunged, passing right by me and charging towards Duncan. The sheer weight of its foot landing next to my tent almost made me bounce off the ground. What happened next was an absolute blur. Primal fear took complete control of my body. I clambered out of my sleeping bag and sprang to my feet, darting headfirst into the pitch-black woods. I didn't know if the thing had got Duncan. I didn't know where Jared and Chris were. I didn't know where I was running, but I ran faster than any human has ever run in their life. It seemed like an eternity before I finally found a break in the trees, though it was probably only a few minutes of sprinting. I stumbled onto an empty gravel road. My socked feet weren't much protection from the jagged rocks. A sharp stone shot deep into my foot, and I shrieked in anguish before remembering my situation and stifling any further noise. As I stood there, looking down at my injured foot, I heard the heavy footsteps once again, only about 50 feet in front of me. It emerged from the tree line. It stood in the middle of the gravel road, looking away from me. It was so massive that even while standing dead center on the wide road, its thick, heavy tail was still dragging in the bushes on the side. The full moon illuminated its form perfectly. No, it couldn't be. As the loose leaves from the surrounding trees fluttered down between us, it slowly turned its head towards me, almost in cinematic slow motion. There it stood. It looked like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. A Rhinoceros Rex? Anyway, yeah, I ran the fuck away. We all got away, actually. Except for Duncan. He's dead as hell. Story 4. So, you want to go hunting? Maybe you're hungry? Maybe you're looking to sell? Or maybe you're just batshit crazy and want to find something to show to the world. Well, here's a guide on the one thing you don't do. Don't mess with skinwalkers. Stories of 10-foot beasts pale as snow, with claws like kitchen knives and teeth like drills. I can tell you one thing, they are freaking real. A while back, a couple of my mates and I were getting drunk at a local bar. We had just killed a bear that had been harassing campers, and we were boasting over our win against nature. I remember my mate Nathan saying something along the lines of, "I bet we can kill anything anyone throws at us." But he was cut off by the sound of a heavy glass hammering down on the wooden counter. We all turned around to face the origin of the noise. We saw some old guy, not your average veteran down on his luck, but some poor prick who had been beaten half to death by life while watching everything he loved die. "So, you want to go hunting?" he said, his tone low, rough, and shaky. "Yeah, what's it to you, old man?" retorted my other mate Alex. He was laughing and trying to imitate the guy's hunch and facial features until he suddenly got hit square in the face with a shot glass. The old man looked pissed, properly pissed, like kicked in the balls by the guy who shagged your girl level of pissed. "You know nothing of these woods, boy. You think you're the king of the world." He chucked an old battered diary at us. "Go claim your glory and come back to me when it's done." He then swiveled around on his bar stool and ordered another drink. Mark picked up the diary and handed it to me, his eyes full of excitement. We left the bar and flicked through the entries. Inside, there were photographs of a family from years past, alongside dozens and dozens of frantic scribbled sketches. They looked like they had been drawn in a matter of seconds, sketches of a human, but not a human. It was something lanky, hunched over, and in every drawing, the thing was facing away from the artist, looking like it was feasting on something. But that wasn't the important part. The logs in the diary described his expeditions, his hunts for this thing, referred to by multiple names: Wendigo, Rake, Skinwalker, Shy Guy, and Goatman. This guy's lost his mind. Someone chuckled. Let's just leave it and go find some wolves or something that people actually pay us to get rid of. But I shook my head. We couldn't just leave it. This guy may have been mad, but the pictures were incredibly detailed. Bullet holes, scratches, scars. Every tiny mark on the beast was carefully noted. No, I heard myself mutter. No, we've got to do this. Imagine what people will say when we drag this thing's rotting shitbag of a body back to town. People will call us heroes. We'll go down in history for discovering a new species. My rallying speech worked, and the guys cheered in agreement. That was the single worst thing I have ever done. Over the next few days, we called up more mates and gathered everything together. We packed 50 caliber rifles, shotguns, 44 seconds, and a few hunting knives. In total, we had 19 guys. The more the merrier. We packed sleeping bags, tents, cans of food, and loaded up our vans. Following the directions in the old man's diary, we found a spot to camp for the night, planning to start the hunt the next day. That night, we lit a fire, drinking and singing like madmen, before eventually starting to get ready for sleep. Mark went off into the tree line to urinate. As he walked away, I remember hearing the sound of howling. But it wasn't a wolf howl. It consisted of low, guttural moans, but way too loud to be human moans, if that makes any sense. Imagine the sound of a man whose throat has just been ripped open. A few of us heard it. Alex joked, "Hey, is Mark having some fun out there?" Which got a loud laugh out of the group, like it was the funniest joke in the world. It wasn't funny for long. I woke up to the sound of screaming, retching, and violent vomiting. I grabbed my rifle and pushed myself out of the tent to see what the commotion was. Oh God, oh fuck me. Holy shit. Alex was screaming, the loudest over the terrified, jittery shrieks of the other guys. I pushed past them and saw Mark, but it wasn't Mark anymore. He was impaled on a tree branch, his left arm completely gone, his right hand missing, and his torso sliced wide open. His entrails hung out of his body, dangling in the dirt. He was entirely coated in thick blood. And then I noticed his face. It was contorted into an eternal scream, but his jaw was missing, along with both of his eyes. We had to pull his body down, and chunks of him literally fell off in our hands. More cursing, more vomiting, and terrified crying ensued. Oh God, Mark. Mark, I'm so sorry. Alex was crying hysterically, having pissed himself at this point. I was on the verge of shitting bricks myself. Some fucker did this, and we won't let him get away. A big guy named Ralph, a close friend of Alex, rallied us. "Let's go get this fucker," he cried out. We all cheered, grabbed our gear, and began following a heavy trail of blood that had been left behind, except for Alex. He remained sitting by his tent, drinking between heavy sobs. "You ain't coming?" I asked him nervously. He smiled weakly. Nah, man. Go get that bitch for me." He sipped his beer and stared blankly ahead. I patted him on the back and jogged to catch up with the others. We eventually reached the mouth of a dark cave. The scent of sulfur was so strong, I had to cover my mouth and nose with the collar of my shirt, but it did nothing to block out the putrid stench of decay. The entrance was caked in blood and the rotting carcasses of various forest creatures, their bones decaying under the thin sunlight streaming through the branches. The distinct sound of bones crunching and flesh tearing echoed from deep within the cave, giving me goosebumps. So this thing is still feasting. Enjoy your last meal, fucker, I thought. Ralph decided we would set a trap and butcher the thing once it was caught off guard. We all nodded and followed his orders. We caught a deer, slit its throat, and left it to bleed out right outside the cave entrance. I propped my rifle between two branches and aimed directly at the deer. The others hid in the bushes or behind trees with machetes, Bowie knives, and loaded firearms. About half an hour later, Sam got bored. "I'm gonna go get this fucker," he muttered. He cocked his .44 and marched straight into the cave. We tried to whisper shout to stop him, but his mind was made up. We all waited in tense silence. As I stared at the ground around the deer carcass, I suddenly noticed the sheer number of paw prints in the dirt. There were so many of them, but they didn't belong to the same type of creature. It was as if every animal on Noah's fucking ark had stopped by this spot. "Wait a minute," I whispered to myself. "Since when do wolves walk on two legs?" I was suddenly interrupted by the most heart-wrenching noise a human could ever let escape their mouth. A scream. It wasn't just any scream you hear in movies. It was a high-pitched, agonizing shriek. It started off as a shocked gasp, but very soon, gunshots rang out through the hollow cave. It sounded like Sam's throat was breaking open, followed by heavy, sickening thuds of a body being slammed against solid stone. Then, absolute silence. "Sam?" I whispered. A sob escaped my throat. And then, we saw it. It emerged from the cave. It was a hairless, pale, human-like entity. It was as tall as the tallest NBA player, lanky as hell, and completely naked. That's when shit truly hit the fan. Ralph and a few other guys charged at it, trying to pin it down, but the creature cut them down with terrifying ease. "Kill it," I screamed, though I could barely hear my own voice over the chaos. Everyone was on the same page. We opened fire, shooting every single round we had. We emptied entire clips into its body, but nothing stopped it. It just kept hacking, slashing, biting, clawing, and screaming at the men in front of it, until they were reduced to nothing but a pile of butchered meat. We had 19 men at the start of the hunt, and we were dropping like flies. Dylan's legs were sliced clean off his body. Carl's face was smashed flat under the thing's giant, heavy foot. Andrew was slammed into the ground repeatedly until his body literally fell apart. And Ralph was lifted into the air by both arms, and the thing bit his head clean off before ripping his torso in half. The others were cut down in a bloody blur. Only 8 of us were left standing in pure, paralyzed fear. Me, Michael, Daniel, Nathan, Chris, Max, and 2 other guys whose names I didn't know. I didn't give a single shit about killing the monster at this point. I had pissed myself. I didn't think twice. I bolted. I left the others to die. I looked back to see Nathan and Michael running right behind me, followed closely by Daniel, Chris, Max, and the 2 other guys. And following right behind them was the thing. I don't know how it reached us so fast, but it did. I saw it slap one of the guys into a tree trunk with a sickening, wet crunch. He crumpled immediately. The other nameless guy got sliced completely in half by one of the thing's massive blade-like claws. Max tripped over a root, but we couldn't stop. We heard his desperate cries and the sickening crunch of bones as his spine was ripped straight out of his back, and then he lay still. We kept running. I don't know how far we ran, but we finally broke through the trees and reached our campsite. Alex was still there, calmly poking the fire with a stick. "Start the fucking van," I screamed at him. He looked up, his gaze fixing on the tree line behind us. He looked terrified at first, and then incredibly angry. Angrier than he had been at that old man back at the pub. He grabbed a heavy branch from the ground and shoved it into the roaring fire to light it. We ran right past him, trying to drag him with us, but he brushed us off with a terrifying, calm resolve. We piled into the van, started the engine, and threw it in reverse, but we weren't fast enough to avoid seeing what happened next. Alex was brutally beating the creature with the burning branch, every strike harder than the last. For a second, as I stopped the car, it looked like he was actually winning. Maybe he'd kill it. Maybe we had found its weakness, fire. We heard him shouting and screaming in some unknown ancient language, full of pure anger and rage. But when the branch suddenly snapped in half, he froze, and so did the beast. Alex turned around to run, but he was instantly impaled through the chest by the creature's slender, spear-like arm. We slammed on the gas and got the fuck out of Dodge. We made it onto the main road and hit the gas, going well over 80 miles per hour. I looked in the rearview mirror to check behind us. The thing covered in blood, guts, and the pieces of our friends simply stood in the middle of the road, staring after us. And then it ran back into the tree line with incomprehensible speed. And it was gone. We parked outside the bar, nearly crashing into a telephone pole, and raced inside, crying and screaming. The forest, Daniel sobbed before falling to his knees. Chris vomited onto the floor, hugging himself and staring blankly at the ground. Michael was completely silent, and Nathan sobbed uncontrollably into his shoulder. That's the last thing I remember before blacking out. I woke up in a hospital room. Several men in black-looking motherfuckers were standing around my bed alongside a few nurses. Once they noticed I was conscious, they ushered the nurses out. I was then subjected to an interrogation that you'd expect a captured Al-Qaeda member to undergo after 9/11. They gave me no good cop, bad cop routine. They gave it to me straight. Who was with us? What did we find? Did anyone else manage to make it out alive? How did we survive? I answered every single question without hesitation, especially after I saw a black metal suitcase filled with sinister-looking surgical tools sitting right next to me. They made me sign a thick stack of papers, stating that I would never discuss this encounter with any living being. Then they left, and that was that. I was expected to just walk out of the hospital and pretend everything was perfectly fine. I never saw that old guy who gave us the diary ever again. I hope he was captured and is being tortured somewhere dark and cold, or maybe in Iceland. It has been 7 weeks since the incident. Chris shot himself 5 days ago. Daniel has been committed to a high-security psych ward. Michael and Nathan are the only ones left. I don't know why, but they are the only ones I see anymore. We never talk about what happened. We just try to live our lives and forget the scarring ordeal. But I don't think we ever will. And that's the story, guys. But not really. I still see that pale, lanky thing in my nightmares. I still hear its shrieks mixed with the dying screams of my friends. I will never forget the look on Alex's face when that burning branch broke. So if there's one thing to learn from this, whatever you hear, and no matter how much money or glory someone offers you, stay the fuck away from skinwalkers, or be prepared to suffer a punishment worse than any sicko could ever conjure up.